Welcome everyone to our September edition of our Alumni Speaker Series. My name is Talisa Keel, for those who do not know me. I have the pleasure of working for the Mission Continues and leading our Alumni Network program. This series is brought to you all because we know that veterans have a desire to continue to serve, and many of the veterans that we do serve have completed a program with our organization. Programs such as our fellowship program, which has sunsetted, our platoon leadership program, mass deployment, our service leadership corps program, the Women Veterans Leadership Summit, now also the Women Veterans Leadership Program. And all of those folks that have completed our premier programs are now considered our Mission Continues alumni. Bringing in the Alumni Network provides us an opportunity to really bring in alumni from all over the country and provide professional development opportunities such as the one that we are going to have tonight. So it's so exciting to have one of our own alumnus host tonight's workshop. But before we get started, I do want to tell you all, if this is your first time engaging with the Mission Continues, a little bit about us. As I said earlier, we are an organization that believes that veterans have a desire to continue to serve, and we do that in many different ways. The meat and bones of our organization is our platoon program. You can find a platoon in almost 56 cities across the country. All you have to do is go to missioncontinues.org and identify a service platoon or project in your area. What does that mean and what does that look like? That looks like veterans and community members coming together and going into underserved communities to put on community service projects. We do this across the country. Right now, as you can see in my background, we are commemorating the 20th anniversary of 9/11. And we're doing that through a big campaign that we call Operation Enduring Service. So I really want to encourage you to go to our website so that you can learn more about Operation Enduring Service, identify a project in your area, or join our storytelling platform to let us know how 9/11 has affected you. Now, most importantly, we are here because September is also known as Suicide Prevention Awareness Month. And that is why tonight's session is going to be geared towards suicide prevention. To tell you a little bit more about why suicide prevention is so important to the Mission Continues, I am going to invite my boss, the Chief Programs Officer for the Mission Continues, Susan Faxton, to tell you a little bit about our work with the Warrior Wellness Alliance. I'm going to hand it over to Susan.
Thank you, Talisa. And thanks everybody for joining us tonight. It's great to have so many people on this. I think it really speaks to the important topic here tonight and people wanting to learn more. Just a little bit about how the Mission Continues fits into this, into suicide prevention. What I would say is, first of all, we're not a clinical provider. We'll never imagine ourselves to be a clinical provider. We don't have mental health professionals on our staff, and we don't think of ourselves in that way. How we think about ourselves is kind of further back up the stream, if you will. So hopefully that with veterans interacting with us, coming out to our service projects, connecting with other veterans, hopefully it prevents people from actually getting to the point where they're in that very dark place. That by working through the Mission Continues, other VSOs as well, where they find connection, where they find purpose, and in a place of belonging. We are part of the Veteran Wellness Alliance through the Bush Institute, and we also are part of and want to talk a little bit tonight about check-in, and that may come up later again. But we understand it's really important because we do have veterans that reach out to us, and we do have veterans reaching out that are asking for help. As a peer support organization in this space, what we found is occasionally there are veterans who don't feel comfortable going into a clinical care environment on their own, or they don't feel that that's not really for them. But through coming into a service project, and they're just talking to somebody else and finding out they that maybe they're not the only one, or that there's somebody who can validate, no, you should and you can go get care. And these are the places you can go to do that, that's kind of a real value that we have that we can offer to our veterans. And so through our participation in the Veteran Wellness Alliance and through Check-In, which we can share the link tonight if it's not shared earlier in the presentation, we have the ability, as anybody can go on the ability and actually refer a veteran to get the proper mental health care that they need. And so we can share that later again, but I want to thank everybody who's participating tonight and all the panelists that are coming. And thank you so much. And thank you to everybody for showing up tonight and participating in this important discussion.
Thank you so much, Susan. So next, I'm going to take a moment to introduce tonight's host and hand the reins over to that, because as I said earlier, this is an alum-led network. And with that being said, I want to introduce our host for the night. Our host for tonight is Pat Carney. Pat is an Army veteran, for all those in the chat. Post what branch that you served in. Let's see who has the most representation tonight. I believe it will be Army, but we'll see. But Pat Carney served in the Army for 8 years. He had multiple combat tours and eventually did get out on an injury. And like many of us, we can all relate that the transitional process isn't always the easiest. And Pat really found himself sort of lost outside of the uniform. He did, however, decide to go to school and earn his degree in psychology. And as he got involved with the Student Veterans Program on his campus, he found us, the Mission Continues, which we are so excited about. And he went through our fellowship program. Recently, Pat reached out to me and well, here we are. And so I'm gonna let him tell us a little bit more about why it was important for him to reach out to the Mission Continues and why we're here today. So without further ado, Pat Carney, the show is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Talisa. Thank you, Susan. It is incredible to be here. I never really thought, after my time with Mission Continues, I kind of thought I was done. And then with all of this, a random email came in from the Mission Continues from you, Talisa, and I decided to respond to it and send you a flyer as well. I think we exchanged flyers, and here we are tonight. And that's exactly where this event was spawned from. And I can't help but feel tonight is a momentous occasion for not only veterans, but for veteran service organizations and for the VA. Typically, when someone starts at their local VA medical center, which I do work for, they're told that when you've been to one VA, you've been to one VA. And I'm sure my other presenters here tonight can attest to that. What that means is that all VA medical centers are different in the way their day-to-day operations, and no two medical centers are alike. It's a big reason why veterans can have night and day experiences at different VA medical centers that may be only 30 miles away from each other. And that's the fact that led us into tonight's presentation. One VA, one veteran at a time is a mantra that is being showcased here tonight. It's a saying that encompasses the way that my team at Wilmington VA Medical Center in Delaware operates, and each one of these suicide prevention coordinators believe in. The need for this type of mindset comes from areas of operation for VA that are unique and where multiple VA medical centers cover a similar, if not the same area of operation. One of those areas that is the area that my outreach team covers. Historically, each VA stayed in their catchment areas, never crossing invisible lines, and rarely, if ever, engaged with one another. That was until the VA decided to hire a former Army infantryman, a Mission Continues fellow, and a veteran who uses the system that he's now working for. The days of VA sticking to themselves was over. I'm definitely not alone in this change. It took an entire community, our VA partners, local officials, and especially the veteran service organizations, like the Mission Continues. I can't tell you how important community and the service organizations have been in the success that we've had in our little section of the world here. Tonight, we have VA suicide prevention coordinators from each time zone across the country. That was accomplished by a veteran service organization. It was accomplished by Mission Continues, by the idea of an Army infantry guy from South Jersey talking to a lady who lives in Texas. Each and every one of these people have taken on a mission to end veteran suicide, and tonight is a huge step forward for all of us who have served this great nation. I can't tell you how emotional I get thinking about this and being able to bring everyone together across the country. It is absolutely a huge step, and I don't want to waste any more time. I want to get to it. So Herman, it will be our first presenter. And if Bradley, you could share your
Riley.
Sorry about that, Pat. While I have a moment, before we get started, y'all, I got so excited about tonight's workshop that I forgot to go through our etiquette for for the night. So I'm pretty sure you all know by now with all the Zooms, but if you could, please turn on your camera. We'd love to see your faces, especially when we get to the question portions. Please make sure that you do mute yourself when you're not speaking. We will utilize the chat functions for questions. If you have a question, but you don't want it to be public, but you want it to be asked, please feel free to privately chat myself or Pat, and we'll get it to our speakers. This session is broken up into 2 sessions, starting off with, as you can see, the S.A.V.E. workshop, then followed by a really great panel. So please stay the entire time. And I think that's all I have. If I missed anything, Pat, I am silent for the rest of the evening.
If you do have questions, if you wouldn't mind prefacing, or even a private question, prefacing kind of where you're from, that way we can get the correct person to get a hold of you instead of, you know, New Jersey calling California, theoretically.
Okay, well, so I'll go ahead and get us started. Just kind of starting off with introductions, this is the VA S.A.V.E. training. I'm Herman Graywell. I'm a readjustment counselor at the West Valley Vet Center, formerly of the Phoenix VA Suicide Prevention Team, and soon to return to the Phoenix VA Suicide Prevention Team. I'll go ahead and hand off introductions to my next presenter.
Hey everyone, my name is Jordan Sharp. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and suicide prevention coordinator at the Michael E. DeBakey VA Medical Center in Houston, Texas, and just feeling honored to be here to share this information with you all.
Karen, are you there?
Yes, my name is Karen Wolf, and I'm at the Dayton VA Medical Center in Dayton, Ohio. I'm the suicide prevention coordinator there, and I'm glad to be here with everyone.
And I'm Bradley Jacobs. I'm the suicide prevention coordinator for New Jersey. I'm based out of the East Orange, New Jersey campus. Herman, back to you.
All right, so as we get started today, a couple of kind of housekeeping notes. Bradley, if you give us a next slide, please. So a couple things. So regarding questions, we're going to try to work our way through the training as efficiently as possible. So we would ask, if you do have questions, please place them in the chat, and we'll try to answer them kind of at the end of the presentation once we've had a chance to provide all the material. It is a lot, so it could be that it's entirely possible some of your questions may be answered later in the presentation. But again, if you do have questions, feel free to place them in the chat. Another kind of housekeeping item, the VA S.A.V.E. training is designed to focus on how to reduce suicide and suicide risk. As such, we're going to be talking about suicide, which is an intense topic for some people. If you need to take a break or step out, please do so. Fundamentally, we really want to make sure that everyone in this space feels safe, feels comfortable, and essentially knows that our first priority is for you to take care of you, and we are here to help do that as well. Obviously, we do have the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline posted. In the event that is kind of where you are, how you are feeling, or a service that you may benefit from in the immediacy, there is the number, and obviously we have every suicide prevention coordinator has a million pieces of equipment that have been posted everywhere. So if you need that contact information, we have it on literally anything you can think of. So we'll go ahead and get started with the presentation. Next slide, please. So we'll kind of discuss our objectives today. I will be presenting facts and about suicide, in largely statistics. We'll talk about common myths versus realities around suicide, the steps of the VA S.A.V.E. Program itself, and then we'll close with the discussion of resources and references, and answer questions at that time. Next slide, please. So, objectives, and moving right along. We can go ahead and bounce past this. So some facts about suicide. So kind of entering the very meaty statistical portion of our discussion. So suicide is a national issue for any of a variety of reasons. So what you'll see very shortly is that suicide counts are increasing across the general population of the United States. When we look at numbers from 2005 to 2018, those are kind of the numbers we'll be talking about today. There was a recent update to that information published, but again, it was very recently published, so we don't have that information available today. So what we really want to impress upon you is that this is a national problem, and it is such a significant problem because, as you'll notice from the second point in the slide, for every suicide, it can that the impact of which can ripple out and affect up to estimated 135 individuals. So for every one person that is affected by suicide, that impact pushes out to 135 more people. So as such, not just the VA, but I think every veteran organization has taken it upon themselves to make suicide their number one priority and has tirelessly develop strategies to try to prevent and address this topic. Next slide, please. So there are annual reports that discuss trends in veteran suicide deaths. We'll be talking about the ones from 2005 to 2008. There are state data sheets on the link below. So if you are really excited about numbers, you can get that data regarding the state level, state or territory level, and that data is updated to and through the 2021 data. Next slide, please. So, as we're talking about a pretty grim subject, I'd like to begin by first kind of talking about some things to be hopeful for. So, we can look at what we call these are our anchors of hope. So we've got first and foremost, suicide rates have slightly fallen amongst veterans engaged in care between 2017 and 2018. So that's a positive sign. Specifically focused on veterans engaged in VHA care, rates fell from 2005 to 2018 for those with depression, anxiety, and substance abuse disorders. In 2018, suicide rates decreased for specific veteran populations. They did not significantly increase between 2017 and 2018. And most importantly, there is a huge groundswell of support for this issue. So I'm sure as we're gathering from this discussion this evening, this is a priority for everyone involved. Next slide, please. So the first portion we've got to take a look at is suicide counts. These are overall counts. You'll notice that amongst both the veteran population and the population at large, those numbers increased between 2005 to 2018. And again, these are raw counts. These are not done by percentages. Next slide, please. And again, these are counts. You'll see that there's a slight uptick from 2005 to 2018. We're seeing numbers go from 6,000 to about 6,400. I won't belabor the point regarding the numbers just because these slides will be available to you, in the event that that you need them. Next slide, please. So this is a lot of information. Effectively, what it's going to show us is that from the year 2005 to the year 2018, suicide rates for veterans, the average number of suicides per day has risen from 16.6 to 17.6. So I know we've talked about the number 22 quite a bit, but we'll have to keep in mind that as we gather more data, that number has changed, as well as the fact that obviously rates have slightly reduced in the recent past. Next slide, please. So this is a lot of data. We'll kind of just focus on the key points here. So the age and sex adjusted rates for veterans were higher and rose faster than non-veteran US adults. So if there are any questions about age and sex adjusted rates, basically we will these numbers have been mathematically adjusted to reflect kind of the average amongst, a controlled. I'm trying to put this. Basically, we've adjusted for age and sex to kind of give us an average across the board. I can provide more information that later if anyone's really excited or interested in that. So you'll notice at the bottom, kind of the key takeaway from the slide is, as of 2005, the average suicide rate for a veteran was 1.2 times what a non-veteran was. And that rate has grown from 2013 through 2018 to 1.5 times the rate after we again adjust for differences in age and sex. So the average of everyone across the board. Next slide, please. So this is kind of where we get into those anchors of hope. So you'll notice from 2005 to 2018, once we adjust for age and sex, suicide rates increased at 25% for veterans engaged with recent VA health or recent VA care use. So that's defined as like within the last year, and 57% for veterans without. So a big takeaway from that information is that those rates do not, we can take away the correlation between engagement in veteran care and reduction in rates of suicide, at least in terms of decreasing versus increasing trends. In addition to that, there was between 2017 and 2018 a slight decrease among veterans who were engaged in care and a slight increase among veterans who weren't. So that kind of goes to show us overall, the big takeaway is, engagement in VA care does have a beneficial effect when it comes to suicide. Next slide, please. So again, a lot of data. This goes back to our, the previous anchor of hope when we're talking about suicide rates regarding veterans who are engaged in VA care, who experience depression, anxiety, substance abuse. This actually goes through a series of disorders. That's why we have so many data curves. But effectively, amongst the three mentioned earlier, there has been a decline in suicide rate. Next slide, please. So kind of breaking into specific populations. So for women veterans, among women veterans, suicide counts decreased slightly in 2018, from 2017 to 2018. However, overall, that number has increased from 2005. So, and notably, those rates among women veterans have increased at a faster rate than non-veterans. Next slide, please. So this is a little bit of demographic data. You'll notice that the largest population that is affected here when we look at demographics by race is that 87.3% of veteran suicide are from the Caucasian population, and that there does appear to be some variance among various ethnicities. Why that is, we're still delving into. Next slide, please. Now, we're kind of getting into lethal means, which is kind of something I wanted to take a moment to discuss in a little bit more detail. So you'll notice that amongst lethal means used, firearms were the highest used method amongst veterans, both male and female, and higher than their civilian counterparts. And so regardless of gender, this is a more frequent means used. Next slide, please. So let's talk about why that's so important. So a lot of, a quintessential component of suicide prevention is time. Suicide, like any other behavioral impulse, rises and falls with time, right? So we're talking about buying time to reduce the urge to act on that impulse. You'll notice from the slide that 24% of attempters do so within less than 5 minutes of the decision to act to action, and that 71% do so within an hour. Now, to put that in perspective, We've been on this call for 34 minutes. So we've already passed the 48% mark. And of particular note, you'll notice that for those that use firearms, they have a pretty significant fatality rate. So what this slide kind of informs us is that, preventing suicide is a game of moments. It is about how we can buy time. And so with that being said, we will take a moment to kind of talk about means reduction, because if we can buy time, we can reduce the likelihood of those severe outcomes. So I want to take a second and kind of define means reduction, because I don't want to give the impression that what we're suggesting is like, hey, so it would be safest if we eliminate firearms. I'm not suggesting that. Rather, we are suggesting the idea of when we look at our access to means, if there are ways that we can temporarily reduce access to means, we can potentially substantially reduce risk. So what that can look like is any of a myriad of things. So in some situations, that may be anything from surrendering firearms or other lethal means to trusted friends or family members. It could be, in some instances, if we have a safe, maybe it's lock them in the safe and entrust someone else with a combination or allow them to change the combination. Every VA suicide prevention team has, just a plethora of gun locks, more specifically the cable lock style lock that we give away in mass. I would say when I was a suicide prevention case manager, I literally had a pallet of them in my office. So like, think of a pallet, all of those, and we made quick work of them. We gave them out everywhere we could. The idea being, again, if we can limit that access, maybe it's just, using a cable lock to lock your bolt to the rear and pass that key on to somebody that you can, someone that you can trust. In some situations, I've heard of people even going as far as having a friend, a trusted friend or family member, manage their medications for them, or just dispense them a day or two at a time. Either way, we're kind of getting in the, I can kind of go on and on in that direction, but it's the idea being getting into that creative space where we're looking and talking about how can we reduce access to means, if only temporarily. Next slide, please. So this is just a little bit of information about, veterans that were not federally activated, and you'll notice that even there, those suicide rates are higher than the general population. Next slide, please. So what does the data tells us? Well, it tells us that suicide is a pretty significant concern. Does it tell us why these suicide numbers are what are the way they are? The short answer is there really isn't a single cause. There's a complex number of risks and protective factors. Usually when we assess risk, what we do is look at on the whole what someone's risk factors are and what their resiliency factors are, and try to make an assessment of either how we can reduce risk or enhance resiliency. So our next slide will kind of just outline a few different risk versus resiliency factors. For example, it's not an inclusive list, but it is some. So you'll notice chief amongst the level of risk, we've got prior suicide attempts. So suicidality is one of the highest risk indicators of future suicidality. And you'll notice that amongst protective factors, access to mental health care, social, emotional well-being, a sense of connectedness, right? So, we're all here this evening talking about how we can help one another and how we can help the veteran community, and how we can help ourselves amongst the veteran community. And, that really speaks to that idea of connectedness. So the big takeaway, I hope what you gather from this slide is that we can reduce risk, we can enhance protective factors. Suicide is preventable. Next slide, please. So with that being said, I'd like to hand the microphone off to Jordan, who's going to discuss common myths and realities about suicide.
Yes, thank you, Herman. That was great, very thorough. My section is going to be a little bit shorter, which is probably good. Less likelihood that I say something embarrassing, but we'll see about that, to be determined. But I'm going to cover some of these common myths and realities. Now, what we know, as Herman alluded to, is that suicide is a major public health issue. And there has been efforts to bring awareness to suicide in the community and in our society, but there are still these commonly held misconceptions or beliefs that aren't based in reality. So we're going to take some time, again, not no inclusive list, but we're going to take some time to touch on a couple of them to kind of dig into them a little bit. And what I encourage you all to do is, even outside of this information that I'm going to share with you, is after this, during this, take some time to just take some inventory of your own thoughts and beliefs about suicide, and try to think about maybe doing some reality testing. Talk to your peers about it, whether it's your local subject matter expert, local suicide coordinator. Reach out to us. We're going to save some time after this to address any questions you have specific to our presentation. So take note, put it in the chat. We will answer your questions. But go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So one of them here, so people who talk about suicide are just seeking attention. So I feel like this is a pretty dangerous one. And I don't want to speak in too much black and white. You know, there's always gray when we're talking about human beings, but we would generally say this is a myth. And the dangerous part about this, looking at this as a reality, is it kind of equates to, if we see that, if we believe that anytime someone talks about suicide, that they're just seeking attention and they're not going to take action, and we could be missing opportunities to intervene and be that person that they can speak to and feel safe in talking to, and maybe even lead to more specialized help and care if that's what they need. So we definitely don't want to hold that as a blanket rule. So no matter, as you can see here, no matter how casually or jokingly it's said, it could be a statement like, oh, you wouldn't even miss me if I was gone. I should just kill myself over that. We want to take it seriously and ask about it. And my colleague, Ms. Karen, will talk about what that looks like, asking these questions a little bit further ahead. So I won't go into that in detail, but we want to just be able to feel at least somewhat comfortable with asking about these things when we hear. If we in our gut, we kind of see an indication that there might be a reason for concern. Another myth that we didn't list in this presentation for today, but I think is linked to this, is this idea that, and I'm going to attach it to this one, this idea that if we ask about suicide, that we might be promoting, you know, planting a seed that someone might follow on to take action to hurt themselves. Some people might think, oh, I better not say anything because it might push them one way or the other. But what we know is that asking these questions, there's an indication that there's serious suicidal feelings, asking these questions creates a safe space for them to talk about it. And even if you don't feel like a specialized clinician or therapist to be able to address maybe some more complicated mental health issues or whatever may be going on, you could be that person to just be present and create a safe space and listen, and maybe that bridge to getting them to more specialized help. So we can go to the next slide. Another one, myth versus reality. The only one who can really help someone is mental health therapist, the only one who can help someone who is suicidal is a mental health therapist or counselor. So I kind of touched on that in this last one, but we kind of have this phrase, the saying we say in the VA that suicide prevention is everyone's business. And what we mean by that is, you know, just think about if we're waiting for folks that are in a challenging place and really struggling in distress to get to a mental health therapist, we could be waiting a long time. They may never get to that mental health therapist without some support and motivation. So what we can do is you know, do what we can and ask the questions and talk with folks and just provide that safe space for them to be able to talk about suicide. And what that looks like is just being genuine, being authentic, and again, just listening sometimes. That can be an intervention in itself, listening, and then, you know, we've shared resources where we can connect people to. So if you don't have special training, please don't be dissuaded from asking these questions, and don't feel uncomfortable about asking these questions. You might be that person that they just feel comfortable with, and we don't want to shut it down. So again, we're generally speaking, to go back to the other one, if someone is speaking about suicide, that doesn't necessarily mean that they are going to take action, but it doesn't mean that they aren't. So we want to avoid having these blanket black and white beliefs, and just seek understanding and ask questions. Again, one last thing I'll add before handing it off to our next presenter is another way of looking at it is kind of a risk reward way of looking at it. The worst that generally is going to happen if you ask about it is maybe they think you're being dramatic. Maybe they think you're being too serious, and maybe they think you're being awkward. Like, why are you asking me that question? Why are you asking me about suicide? I was just joking. So, okay, it's awkward for a little bit, but then you move on and you continue your conversation. But the reward on the other extreme end of it is maybe this was the opportunity for them to talk to someone. They felt like they could talk to you. So please don't hesitate to ask the question. We're going to move on and talk a little bit about what that looks like so that you can practice and feel comfortable with how to do that. So I'm going to hand it off to our next presenter here.
So this is Karen, and I'm going to go over the steps of S.A.V.E, VA S.A.V.E. Next slide, please. All righty. So what you know is that the VA S.A.V.E. is a compassionate and caring way to encounter someone with a crisis situation. The acronyms, we know that we remember them if we really truly are working to remember something. They help us to act, just like the fire safety ones, you know, so that's why we came up with S.A.V.E. The S stands for suicidal thinking and being able to recognize the warning signs. A is asking the most important question of all. V is validating the veteran's feelings and their experience. And then we want to encourage them to get treatment, and then expedite getting them help. Next slide. So here are a few signs about someone that might be thinking about suicide. And we have the hopelessness, the feeling like there's no way out. And for those folks that don't know what that might look like, I'm going to just give you a little example. If somebody is getting out of the military and they're looking for a job and they can't find a job and they can't find a job, and then they're behind on their rent, they're behind on their payments, they're behind financially, and that causes problems between their relationships. And so then the relationship starts kind of getting a little worse. And then the children start acting up, and you don't see an end to that. There's no solution to be able to resolve that. That may be a possibility that they might be thinking about suicide. Or if they went through treatment after treatment after treatment and nothing seems to work, that is another way that they may feel like there's no way out other than suicide. So we really want to be in tune to how they feel about the treatment they're getting and whether it's effective or not. There are some other feeling like there's no reason to live. Maybe they've lost their purpose, or they've lost their ability to know who they are in the family, those kind of things. So we really need to tie into those kind of things and really look at how do we help them rebuild who they are. It may not look like it was before, but it can be looked at as what does the new me look like, and how do we move forward in this? Engaging in risky behaviors without thinking about it. A lot of times if we're under the influence of drugs and alcohol, it might tend to allow us to do things we never would do before. So if we have someone that's thinking about suicide and they're under the influence of drugs or alcohol, we may end up having someone that is attempting now. So we really want to pay attention to their drug and alcohol use, just so we can be mindful of that. And for clinicians here, at least for myself, we would not know if any veteran is withdrawing from family or friends. So unless you are calling us and letting us know that, we would not know that part. And maybe the veteran is in such a point that that's something that they missed to tell us. They forgot to tell us, not meaningly, but just happened to not cross their mind when they were in session with us. So it's so important to include those family members in treatment when we're working around suicidality, so that we can see the whole picture and we can kind of help the veteran where they're at. Next slide, please. So if you see any of these present, we ask that you get them immediate attention. If they're thinking about harming themselves or killing themselves, if they're looking up ways to die, if they're talking about death, dying, or suicide, or they're engaging in risky behaviors or destructive behaviors, and it involves alcohol, drugs, or weapons, we are asking that you call 911 and get them help. You can call their providers if their providers are open, if it's during the day, or you can call the Veterans Crisis Line during that time frame. Next slide. So now I'm going to change over to how to ask the most important question of all. Next slide. Are you thinking about killing yourself? And then this is some do's and don'ts, and I'm going to let you read through the do's and don'ts while I talk a little bit about asking the most important question. The reason that we want to ask it in a way where it's very, very direct and very frank is because if we don't ask the question, we don't really know the answer. So if we have someone that is thinking about hurting themselves, they may answer that they're thinking about hurting themselves, but not killing themselves. And we may have someone that might be thinking about killing themselves who don't say that they're thinking about hurting themselves because they do not plan on hurting at all. So if we want to know what we're really working with, we really need to get comfortable in being able to ask that question and get it in a conversation where it's a natural flow. A lot of times, if you hear that hopeless talk, there'll be some time in there that you can say, you know, it looks like you're really in a dark place right now. Are you thinking about killing yourself? Have you ever thought about killing yourself? And let them speak and answer that. All right, next question, next slide, please. So this is a little bit of check-in. We're not going to have these as questions and open the floor. What we're going to have you do is just, these are takeaways for you to think about when you get home. You know, what are your thoughts about asking the question? You know, what initial concerns do you have? And then I'll demonstrate some very well opportunities to ask that question and some that are not. And one would be, are you thinking about harming yourself when you're really, if you're thinking that they're thinking about killing themselves, you need to ask it in that manner. I always tell people, follow your gut. You know, you're not really thinking about killing yourself, are you? You know, we try to stay away from those type of questions that really bring out the no answers. And we want to put it in an answer or a question that leads to talking. Because the whole effect is to get the veterans talking about what they're going through. And it might not start out as a suicide. You know, they might say no at the beginning, but as they start talking further and further along, they may end up actually coming back and saying, you know, I really was thinking about suicide. Next slide. So now we're going to talk about validating the veterans' experience and their feelings. And that is really just being willing to openly talk about suicide with them. You know, a lot of times it doesn't even mean that we have to talk. It just means we have to be willing to listen and allow the veterans to really express their feelings and understand that it's serious, but that's where they're at. And so we want to meet them where they're at and walk with them to the road to recovery. And if we're walking with them, we can kind of help guide them if they get stuck along the way. And anyone can do that. Anyone at home, anyone can do that. We don't want to pass judgment and say, what would your wife think about that? Or what would your family think? Or how would your wife feel if you did that? Because that's not where that veteran's at. And so we really want to meet them where they're at, and we want to get them to the next level of help. And so being able to just say, you know, I hear what you're saying, and validating. And how we validate is by repeating what they say, paraphrasing what they're saying, so they hear that you hear what they're saying. Because a lot of times we really need to be there for them. We need to put our phones down, we need to think, and we need to just be there. When it comes time to pick up the phone and dial 911 or the Veterans Crisis Line, you do it together, okay? We want to reassure the veterans that help is available. Next slide. So now we want to encourage treatment and expedite getting them treatment. We do not ever keep secrets. So if somebody promises you to keep a secret about suicidal behaviors, you need to let people know that. You need to let the next level of care know that. In some of our professions, we can't keep those a secret, and it's something that we just have to speak to very, very frank with the veterans about. You know, we don't want to leave them alone. So if they're thinking about suicide, or if you think they're thinking about suicide, we want to be with them. Make sure you have your phone with you or something so you can call for help if you need to, but you need to be there with them at all times. We want to have them seek help. So we want to say, a lot of times I'm talking to the general public, I'm saying, we want to say to our loved one, you know, I want to be here with you, and we're going to call somebody because I'm really not sure what we should be doing, but I know that you're not feeling the best and you might be in the darkest place I've ever saw you at. So can we call the Veterans Crisis Line? Can we go to the ER? Can we do this together so that I'll be there with you the whole time. If nothing else, you can always call 911 and ask them to come. The suggestion I have is to answer all the questions that they're asking you. The more information you can give about the situation, the better the outcome is going to be. We can never promise if you call 911 that somebody won't get arrested. You know, we do not know their legal history, but I would rather them be in jail and be alive than not. And so I'm always encouraging folks to truly call 911 if you need to. We want to reassure them that help is available, and the Veterans Crisis Line is 1-800-273-8255, and please press 1 for the Veterans Crisis Line. If you call that number and you don't press 1, you will get a national hotline that is made for suicide, so they can still help you. It just will not help link that veteran back up to VA care once you're through that crisis. Next slide. So when we're talking with a veteran about suicide, there's a couple of things we want you to remember. And the first thing it says is to remain calm. And I don't know anyone that is with someone that's actively suicidal that truly is as calm as they can be. What you can do is know when and what to do. Have the phone numbers programmed in your phone to call 911, to call the Veterans Crisis Line, so that you don't have to think about that if that time comes. The more you're familiar about what steps you need to take and how to take them, the calmer you're going to be. And the calmer you're going to be is going to be portrayed onto the veteran's going to feel that calmness, and it could calm them down too. We want to remember to listen more than we speak. A lot of times when we get anxious about stuff, we talk a lot. So we want to slow down. We want to be there for the veteran, and we want to let the veteran talk. This is their time to get their feelings out. We want to act with confidence, and we don't want to argue with them. We don't want to tell them all the reasons that they have to live, because that's not where they're at right now. What we need to do is get them the help that they need right away. So you know, we can worry about tomorrow. Let's just deal with today and where they're at, okay? We always say use open body language. And so I always tell folks that's just making them feel comfortable enough to talk, open up and talk to you. Let them be able to express their feelings and not be afraid that they're going to get shut down or you're not going to be able to handle what they're saying. You may not be able to, but you can get some assistance after the fact if you need that. We want to limit the questions. So we want to know, do we really need to call 911 right now? Or can we call the Veterans Crisis Line? Or can we call the provider right now? What can we do, and what is the veteran willing to allow us to do with them? And sometimes we have to act without the veteran coming and saying it's okay for us to act. And that's the hardest thing for family members to do. But you are the eyes and the ears in the home that really know what's going on. And I always tell folks, sometimes veterans get really angry with us when we have to do that. But once they get to a better spot, they're so grateful for what we've done with them. We want to be supportive and encouraging. We want to be honest. We never want to promise them anything outside of the ability of what you can deliver. So if you cannot deliver, whether they're going to be hospitalized or not, what you can say is, well, let's go to the VA or let's go to the nearest hospital and we can get an assessment and then we can go from there. But never promise them that they're automatically going to get admitted. Never promise them that there's going to be a quick fix to the solution. We have a lot of evidence-based treatment, and evidence-based treatment really does work, but it also has a part that the veteran has to have that buy-in also. And sometimes that takes a little bit longer to work through the veteran's issues and concerns than what they might think. And so when you say no quick fix, it's a real quick fix, then that's based on that veteran's perception of what you mean by that. So we try to stay away from that. We try to tell them that there is help available. Let's walk through the steps together, and we'll do this together tonight. Next slide. So what you should do if you have someone that's expressing suicidal while you're on the phone with them, the one thing that we ask is never to hang up or never transfer the call. A lot of times calls get dropped, those kind of things. We just don't want to do that. So again, remain calm, know what you need to do. The one thing that you do want to get from the veteran is their name, their phone number, and where they're currently located at. I don't need to know their home address if they're in the Walmart parking lot thinking about killing themselves. I need to know where to send the police at. I need to know where to send the rescue squad in if that kind of thing comes happening. So the one thing we want to make sure that we're doing is getting their current location instead of their address. We can get their address later. We can conference, if you are a loved one, you can conference in the veteran. So we're asking you to practice conferencing in with your phone so that if you need to call the Veterans Crisis Line, you already know how to conference in to be able to be there with the veteran and the Veterans Crisis Line responder. Please do not hang up until the responder tells you to. There's a lot of information they may not know, and they do not have access to the full electronic health record for the veteran. So they only have limited amount of information, and they may need you to provide some information. So please do not hang up until they tell you to hang up. If you are with a coworker or someone and they're expressing suicidality, you can solicit help through coworkers through the Skype. Again, if a caller hangs up, you can always call them back, or you can call 911 and Veterans Crisis Line, and there's the number again, and you can tell them about the situation and they can reach out and connect with that veteran. Okay, next slide. So words about texting, you know, one thing we want to look at is we want to replace silence with reflection. We want to let them know that we hear what they're saying, that we understand that, you know, they're in probably one of their deepest and darkest moments that they've ever been, and they may not be able to talk about it once they get through it. We don't want to be afraid to be direct. We want to be able to ask those questions. We want to balance the timing, you know, so when is it time to reach out for help? When is it not? And we want to know that anytime that we're texting or anything like that, we cannot tell the tone of what that person means. So sometimes we have to ask them, you know, are you thinking about killing yourself? Because the text may not be saying that, but we don't know. You know, we don't know how they're feeling. We can't tell by what they're saying in those texts. So we want to make sure that we're really looking into that and understanding where they're at if they're texting you. So if they're telling you goodbye and you don't know why they're telling you goodbye, it could mean a million different things. You need to ask them, why are you telling me goodbye? What does that mean? You know, those kind of things. Does that make sense? Next slide. So this is the end of my portion, and I just want to remind everyone that it's VA S.A.V.E. S stands for thinking about suicide and being able to recognize the warning signs. A is asking the most important question of all. V is validating the veteran's experience and their feelings. And E is encouraging treatment and expediting getting them help. And now I'm going to pass it over to Brad to go over some resources and references.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Herman and Jordan. I'm going to talk about the resources available, many of them through the VA, and I'm going to talk both sort of the national resources that are available, but also some things that could be locally available at your VA center. But before I do that, we just want to mention that the VA S.A.V.E. training is available online. It's a nicely produced video, runs about 30 minutes long. And it is a great resource if you can get an account into PsychArmor, and you can share this video in community presentations. So it's just a really good resource to have available to you to share with others. We also want to mention that September is recognized by the VA as Suicide Prevention Month, as Talisa mentioned at the outset. The theme of this month is reach out, and that's really speaking to our encouraging everyone to reach out to a veteran or someone they know who could be experiencing a crisis, could be having thoughts of suicide. We want to encourage all veterans to reach out to those that to know that there are people they can reach out to, that there are those who want to help, that they don't need to continue shouldering the burdens alone, and to definitely reach out to the VA and see what resources might be available to them. There's a website attached to the campaign this year. It's in the corner there, reach.gov/SPM. That website has images like this, e-billboards, things you can put in. You see some of us have these virtual backgrounds that we can attach to our conferences, and also tips on how to help someone and how to support someone who might be experiencing a crisis. So it's a really good resource. The Veterans Crisis Line is, as we've mentioned, and we're going to say it again, if you don't know the number, please make sure it's in your phone. It's important to mention that the veteranscrisisline.net website has a web chat feature that can be used and can be texted at 838-255. And as Karen was talking about, especially younger people are texting more and more, and the crisis line is adapting to that, and certainly will engage and respond to someone via text if that's their preference. Within that veteranscrisisline.net, there's a resource locator. So if you're wondering, who's the suicide prevention coordinator for the VA in Nebraska, you can go on there and you can find that contact information and reach out to somebody. It also has services listed throughout the VA across the country. It's a really easy to use, easy to navigate website. It has a link there also to SAMHSA's Behavioral Health Treatment Services Locator, which goes beyond the VA and can connect someone to community providers as well. So a few resources that are available at most VAs. The VA is moving into this model of healthcare that we call whole health. The idea behind this is really to encourage veterans to think holistically about their healthcare and to be in the driver's seat of their healthcare, to really sort of help direct their own care plan and not just rely on providers to say what's best for them, to really give the veteran the keys to their own recovery. The whole health centers, New Jersey is one of the flagship ones. There are also some integrative care, non-traditional medicine like acupuncture, mindfulness, that are used to help veterans who may experience chronic pain and even those who have chronic suicidal thoughts. So we are really exploring lots of different ways of addressing people's whole health. There is an 800 number for veterans experiencing homelessness. That's the 87748-VET. And every VA has services to support someone with post-traumatic stress disorder. And you can go on the ptsd.va.gov website to learn more about that. And it's important to point out the VA has actually created some really great mobile apps, smartphone apps that are free to anyone. This is just a few that we're highlighting here, but there are many more. So if you've never looked, I would really encourage you to do it. They're just great self-care resources. Some are designed to be adjuncts to therapy, but some are really standalone apps that can be used at any time. Mindfulness Coach is a really great, it's as good as any other mindfulness-based smartphone app that you maybe would pay for, and it's free. So Make the Connection, if you haven't heard of it, is a website that has videos of veterans telling their stories of recovery, talking about their own experiences overcoming addiction, dealing with mental health issues. Includes many stories of veterans who've had suicidal thoughts or attempted suicide and worked their way through that and talk about how they did that. The videos are of varying length, as short as just a minute or two to as long as 15, 20 minutes. Again, it's a nice resource if you find yourself wanting to, use it as part of a presentation or as sort of the lead in to some type of group. There are some really great videos in here, very powerful stories. Oh, play. And then coaching into care, which I know a lot of people are familiar with. This is a resource to help the families and loved ones of veterans learn how they can best support the veteran in care and how to best utilize the VA or help them to utilize the VA. Another really helpful resource, I know most of you are veterans, and so if you work with community providers and you want to encourage some more cultural competence in how to work with people who are in the military or veterans, the Community Provider Toolkit will support that initiative. Also, for those providers who want continuing education credits, many of the trainings there provide that for them. So there's some incentive for many providers beyond just doing the right thing, but they can earn some continuing ed for it. And then finally, for any of you who may be a provider who could be working with somebody who is suicidal, the VAs, and I think this is just important for people to know, one of the strategies the VA is using to address suicide is by creating this consultation program. It's through the Rocky Mountain VA, and they provide this service to anyone that serves veterans. It does not have to be VA staff. And it really will help community providers specifically address situations around suicide as it relates to veterans, from providing education and support around how to assess for risk, how to safely support somebody in the community, and also it provides supports to providers who may have lost a veteran to suicide and how to help them manage through that. They also do these, what we call post-pension resources, so that if we are ever in the situation of wanting to support a veteran or their family around suicide loss, the Rocky Mountain folks can help us make sure we have all the up-to-date information and resources. And one last time, finally, again, the Veterans Crisis Line, 1-800-273-8255, and press 1. And that wraps up our presentation. We hope you have some questions for us, and we're happy to answer them. And Pat, back to you.
Thank you, guys. That was absolutely fantastic. And we've had a couple questions come into the chat, but I do want to. We also had some preset questions just to keep the conversation going. So let's. I do want to start. Our panel is going to be a little different than our presenters. We are joined by Elizabeth Kleeman, Matthew Schmidt, and Matt Jacobs. If you guys would like to say hi real quick, that'd be fantastic.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth.
Hi, I'm Matt Schmidt.
And Matt number 2, good evening, Matt Jacobs, coming from New Jersey.
Equally as good. Both Matts. Fantastic.
You can also call me Matt if you want.
There we go.
We do that. My son named Matt will come in the room.
More Matts. It's just awesome all around.
First question is for Elizabeth. Can you predict a suicide?
Interesting question. So can you predict suicide? Well, I think they did a great job earlier with the Operation S.A.V.E. presentation and kind of setting the stage for what prediction looks like. We do know that there are certain risk factors for suicide. I won't rehash those because you heard them earlier. And there are definitely some warning signs too for suicide. So what I would say is that, to steal the AA phrase, suicide often feels cunning and baffling to people. Like a lot of times people feel completely caught off guard. They'll say like, I had no idea. I'm just completely shocked. And it's a tragedy. It's a sudden loss. So of course you do. And so, it's really why it's incumbent upon us to do the things that we're doing now, to talk openly about suicide risk, to talk openly about how we struggle, what we do to take care of ourselves, to educate people on what suicide risk and warning signs look like, and then to do the very thing that S.A.V.E asks you to do. When you have the intuition that something's wrong, you ask the question, and you ask the question again and again and again, and you connect people to care, and you're present. And I think if we really think about this from like a medical model, because sometimes it's just easier for us to talk about things like heart attacks and strokes and other things, like we are very proficient in talking about the warning signs for heart attacks, the warning signs for strokes. Many of us have fun little acronyms for them, like for strokes. And so really the goal would be for us to have the same level of comfort and accessibility in the community when we talk about warning signs for suicide. So that is just as easy as saying, I'm really worried about dad, his face is drooping, as I'm really worried about dad, he's sleeping a lot more than usual, he's not hanging out with us, he's not talking openly with us, something's up. So, and I hope my other Matt friends will jump in if they have other things to add.
Any other thoughts, Matt and Matt?
I would say you touched on a lot of really great points, and I don't mean to steal the thunder into question number 2, but I think a lot of what you just brought up, Elizabeth, really translates well to, of course, what should you do if someone tells you they are thinking about suicide, right? Like we're talking about going back to the S.A.V.E presentation from earlier. You've kind of jumped ahead when we talk about S.A.V.E, or remember, we're talking about the signs, finding the signs or identifying the signs, asking that important question. And question number 2, what should you do if someone tells you they're thinking about suicide? Well, they're already there, right? We're now in the moment, we're having that conversation. And I thought you did a great point of just talking about getting comfortable with that idea. We do talk a lot about the signs of heart attacks, the signs of strokes. What do you do in those moments? And so you're there. So we're validating the experience. Hopefully we're listening a lot. We're absorbing what that veteran is sharing and working to expedite care whenever and wherever possible. And so, yeah, great job, Elizabeth.
It's actually
Matt, number 1 or 2 approves, however you want to rank us.
It's actually a great answer and a great segue, Matt. We did have a question come in. The questioner asked to remain nameless, which is absolutely fine, of course. The question was, though, that the person was told by a mental health provider when they were in the military that if they talked about their feelings of suicide, they'd be put in the hospital. And of course, that would cause a service member not to want to talk about it. I know personally, when we had in my unit down at Fort Hood, at least, when one of our soldiers presented as suicidal, they were taken to the hospital, and then they were put on a cot and freaking had to stay next to the staff duty desk for days on end. Like, weren't even allowed back in their barracks room, which as a non-commissioned officer, I was like, man, isn't that making it worse? But again, the question is, like, is that what the standard operating procedure is? You say you want to kill yourself, you go to the hospital.
I'll just jump in there. Thank you, first of all, for whoever asked that question, because it's a valid question. It's timely, and I think it's right in line with what we're looking for in terms of having this discussion. There's a lot of stigma around this topic of suicide, and the sad reality is people have had difficult experiences, and sometimes the responses from others have not been therapeutic, or they've been inappropriate in their level of response. When I talk to veterans I've worked with in the past, and other people, is, hospitalization is about safety. So if there's an immediate safety risk, hospital may be the right thing in that moment. If somebody is imminently suicidal, if they have a plan in place, if they are actively acting on that plan, there may be some consequences that result in hospitalization. However, majority of the time, in my experience, I would say the vast majority of the veterans that I've spoken to who were coping with suicidal ideations typically resulted in more of a conversation about creating safety, developing a safety plan, talking about some of the factors that we talked about in the SAVE training, the risk factors, protective factors, the things that led them to that potential solution to their problem, which is to end their life. So therefore, the majority of the time in my experience, talking about suicidal ideations does not result in hospitalizations. I would say the vast majority of the time does not result in hospitalizations. However, there are going to be times when it may be appropriate. So I certainly understand the trepidation asking that of bringing it up. Listen, it's not an easy thing to talk about. Ending our life is not, there's some shame connected to that. There's some substantial difficulty discussing those kinds of heavy topics. If you're on this call tonight, if you're listening right now, then you're somebody who cares and you're somebody who has maybe thought this through yourself. So I'll invite other panelists to chime in, but that's just some of the thoughts that I had in regard to that question.
It's good. Thank you so much.
I think the only thing I'll add, if I can, is that whenever we hear things like that, it's really important, if you've had a different experience, to share, if you're willing to share what that was. We do a really poor job because of shame and stigma and really early learning and stuff that's perpetuated. We do a really poor job of educating people on how mental health care actually works in this country. Instead, we tend to perpetuate misinformation either through the media or through like lore and information that's passed on generationally. And there's just so much that happens between being perfectly fine, totally fine, having absolutely not a single mental health issue, and being involuntarily committed to a psychiatric unit. There's literally thousands of things that happen in between those two points, but a lot of time people only hear about when things are really traumatic or completely involuntary. And so I often will hear this, especially when talking with law enforcement, because very much like the military, they're concerned about being honest about their mental health because of concern about losing extra jobs, extra duties, having their service weapon taken away, et cetera, et cetera. And so just the crisis line is even just a great option. Like you can tell somebody that you're not feeling well and do it completely anonymously and get the help that you need as an outpatient, and nobody ever has to know about it. But so much of that is just so boring and not really interesting that we tend not to talk about those really benign but very helpful interactions much. So anyway, that's that.
Elizabeth, you actually had mentioned about things kind of coming, I think it was almost being passed down from generation to generation. So is suicide, can it be inherited then?
What an interesting question. So is suicide inherited? Well, I think the jury is probably still out on that entirely, but what is heritable? One thing we do know that's heritable is mental illness. And there's a lot of things that are heritable about how families cope. Early learning is about seeing how mom and dad cope, about how whoever your parental figures or those adults are in your life or the community in which you live. And so what we do want to think about is, if you know that you're at risk for having a mental health issue, or you've experienced a mental illness in the past, or maybe even had thoughts of suicide, or you've seen that in your life, it's important to be preventative and get connected to care as early as possible, and even equip the people in your life to say, if you notice these things about me, I probably need someone to say it's time to get help. And again, and I talk about this all the time, but in families, we talk about grandpa had skin cancer, grandma had skin cancer. We need to wear our sunscreen and wear hats and stay out of the sun because we're just at risk for skin cancer. It's the same sort of thing that really needs to be talked about in families. Like grandpa had depression, grandma had depression, and we struggle with anxiety. And so we just need to take care of ourselves as a family.
I'm jump in before you guys move on to the next question? We do have a hand raised.
We do. And there was another question that came in as well to Lisa. And it's actually really a poignant question because of something that is near and dear to my heart and something Matt and I actually have worked on a lot here in New Jersey. Damon had asked that he's currently in his 27th year in the Marine Corps Reserve. I won't hold that against you being an Army guy. That's okay. There's still challenges with the stigma and narrative around suicide prevention. So his question is, how does the VA get early access to service members to serve as a better bridge during transition out of service? Applies to active reserves and guard forces. Matt, you want to take that one?
I'll say, Pat, there's no one better to answer that than you, Pat. Quite honestly. I know that's not your role tonight.
I am. I know. I'm.
You are
and
uniquely
again,
qualified to answer that.
And I try to make it not too long. The current way service members separate from the military is awful. And it's so awful that honestly, I personally admitted that to Secretary Wilkie of the VA, only to find out that Secretary Wilkie and General James Mattis actually created the separation programs at the time. This was 2 or 3 years ago. That's where an incredible gentleman, Dr. Joseph Geraci, comes in, where he is supporting a program. It's called the ETS Sponsorship Program. And I'll make sure to put the link in here to the program. What that does is the ETS Sponsorship Program is very similar, if anyone was in the Army, to the PCS Sponsorship Program, where when you move from base to base, you were given like an NCO or someone that was your PCS post change of service. I can't remember what PCS stands for, but they were your contact person for the receiving base.
Sponsor.
Say again?
Sponsor.
Yes.
It was your
exactly.
sponsor.
Yep. And that's the same concept they took into the ETS sponsorship, expiration term of service program, where veterans, they sign up for or service members sign up for the program before they get out. And they are then connected with someone in their community at home, wherever they designate they're going. So if Damon, you were getting out of the Marine Corps Reserve and you're moving to Southern New Jersey, and I am an ETS sponsor myself, you may be connected with me here in Southern New Jersey to help you get things started here at home, all in the auspices to prevent suicide, and because stressors lead to suicide. Every life stressors and getting out of the military and starting your life over all lead to those the factors that lead up to suicide. So there are things being done, and there are incredible things being done. And I can't tell you how ecstatic I am. I was on a meeting for it right before here, and I was in tears in the meeting because finally all these things that I feel like I've been saying, and I know other members of the military have been saying for years, are finally being listened to. So there are absolutely things being done, and I urge you to check out the etssponsorship.com.
Do we want to take a question from Aaron?
Yes.
Oh, we did have another one come in. Go ahead, Talisa, if you have the other one ready.
Nope, she has her hand raised. Go ahead, Aaron.
Okay, Aaron.
My question is, and maybe it's for Herman, maybe can answer this. My question has to do with the veterans that do either attempt suicide or are successful at suicide. Are most of these veterans currently enrolled in the VA and getting treatment, or is there data on the veterans that attempt and succeed in suicide? Are they non-compliant with treatment or even enrolled in the VA? Or is there an issue with getting them into treatment? Is that what maybe one of the problems is?
I was going to say, Herman, while you're digesting her question, I can speak to one part of that question. Aaron, thank you. I appreciate that question. I can tell you this, the research indicates that 2/3 of veterans who die by suicide are not connected to VA. So that's using the numbers that Herman presented earlier, roughly 10 or 11 out of that 17 are not connected to VA care. But I'll let I don't know, Herman, if you want to jump in on other parts of her question.
Sure, just piggybacking so that so Matt's absolutely correct. The majority of folks, at one point it was even higher than that still, I think the last data set that we had. But yeah, the majority of folks that do complete are not involved or not affiliated with VA care. I think I hope that answers the question. I'm happy to clarify anything further if you have any more. Okay, great.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Just wanted to check, make sure no one else had their hand up. Excellent. Well, going back to kind of the S.A.V.E. workshop, does alcohol and other drug abuse increase the risks for suicide? That's really to anyone.
Well, I guess I'll take that since not
Sure.
very many people are jumping in. Anytime that someone is under the influence of drug or alcohol, it always tends to allow us to do things that we wouldn't do. So if you are thinking about suicide and you're not under the influence, and then you start drinking or using drugs or alcohol or whatever it may be, it might even be prescription medications to self-medicate. It may lead to that person then attempting, because having that altered state of mind allows us to do things that we never thought that we would ever do before in our entire life. So yeah, we do believe that under the influence of either drugs, alcohol, medications can be a risk factor. Doesn't always mean it is, but it can be. And that's why it's so vital for the VA. And we tell our providers all the time, really get a good history about drug and alcohol, know what their baseline is, and know what, if they're using it for stress, when they get stressed out, are they increasing it? Those kind of things to really be able to help identify and really help these veterans that are really in need of care.
Thank you, Karen. I know we're kind of running out of time here, but I did want to make sure this question was asked. Does asking someone about suicide put the idea in their head? This is a question I'm asked all the time, especially by other advocates I work with, who I thought would know the answer to it, but I think it's an important question and an educational one. Matt Jacobs, did you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. And I think the answer to this can be somewhat brief, frankly. As it relates to asking the question and putting that into someone's head, the research indicates that is quite clear on this one, and that's a resounding no. By asking the question, by asking them about suicide, what you're actually doing is you're presenting your own care and empathy for that individual. You're not planting any seeds, because that's a seed that can really only be planted by themselves. So asking the question, the research again indicates that no, that does not plant a seed or put the idea in their head or anything of that nature. Really, like I said, it's just expressing empathy and giving them an opportunity to talk and to express what they're going through, and really just noticing them. One anecdotal story that I like to share is, in my experience working with veterans, you may be surprised to know that there has been relief expressed at that question. And finally being given permission to talk about it and to discuss it in a way that is safe. And to the question earlier in regard to being put in the hospital, we typically try to create safety around this topic. And I know there's a lot of training and effort being put into that to help practitioners and community members to be able to be better equipped to handle that. And even you folks who are on this call right now, you're more equipped to handle that question now as well. So definitely invite asking. If you're thinking it, you got to ask. You got to ask that question. You got to pursue it a little bit, and it's not going to plant the seed. So
if you're asking the question, is it's obviously important, but what about if you see one of those, like a suicidal message on social media, like on Facebook or Twitter or something like that?
Yeah, I think for that, reaching out to the person whatever way feels comfortable. I really liked earlier, in the S.A.V.E training that was offered, how to reach out via text or direct messaging and whatever social media you see that post. Definitely offer crisis resources. I will, I guess, expose myself a little bit here in terms of I moonlight outside of the VA with a mobile mental health crisis team here in the Portland area. And we hear a lot about that on that side of things as well. Certainly in suicide prevention at the VA, someone's concerned that a fellow veteran posted something on Facebook or their Instagram story that they were, really, really sick and tired of something, or I just don't feel like people are listening to me. And it's okay in that moment to, if you feel like you need to, reach out to the Veterans Crisis Line, let them know what you're seeing or hearing and that that's concerning, or, a local crisis line as well. But just to let, reaching out and letting somebody know that, hey, I heard you, I saw what you were posting, I'm really concerned. Feel free to reach out. And again, offering those resources so that they're aware. They may not be aware. In our world in suicide prevention, we have like buttons and stickers and it's like everywhere all the time. So it feels like the information's out there, but for a lot of folks, it's not. So feel free to send that to whoever it is you're concerned about. And that might be that moment, that resource, that number that they're like, yeah, okay, maybe I'll check it out. And yeah, you could really help save someone's life there. So.
That's great advice, Matt. You're in the lead now as for the Matts, at least.
Yes. Matt 1, 3.
And it's funny, I see you're from Portland, Matt Schmidt, obviously, and with New Jersey, there's been changes. I was reminded of changes earlier with Washington State. My best friend in the whole world lives in Washington State, and talking about the firearms and the class 3 felonies and stuff. But that also leads to a question like, does mental health or any lifestyle change have like anything to do with suicidal deaths or ideations?
I mean, I think
whomever, yeah.
Is that as far as like you're talking about like maybe positive changes, or
I would guess more so negative changes. I mean, just getting out of the military, I know, is extremely stressful. But it is. It's just, yeah. I mean, what do they have to do with the suicidal ideations, I guess? Does that make sense? No,
I can hop in.
Okay.
I think, one of the things that I always focus on when I'm talking to people about just general education, even warning signs and risk factors, is we are doing ourselves a disservice. One, if we think that we can just look at someone and tell if they're struggling. A lot of times people believe that they can just tell when someone's having a hard time, and we really can't. I mean, if it were that easy, we wouldn't need psychiatrists, we wouldn't need assessments in the ER. We would just look at someone and say, they're bad, they're doing bad, we need to take care of them. And we also do ourselves a disservice when we think, well, they've never had any trouble in the past. They've never been depressed. They've never been anxious. So this one seemingly little thing that's happened in their life can't possibly be the thing that pushes them over the edge. And I think about people who, have a recent terminal illness, like a recent cancer diagnosis, or they've retired and have a lot of extra time on their hands and a lot of time to think about things that they hadn't thought about maybe ever. The loss of a partner relationship. We oftentimes also do a lot of bargaining with ourselves. Like, well, they would never hurt themselves because they have this great job, even though they, just found out that they have cancer, or they have an illness that's going to impact their functioning. They have a great house, they have a great family. There's absolutely nothing they would do to ever hurt themselves. I really think when we start bargaining with ourselves that way, we're probably talking ourselves out of asking the question, out of taking better care of them. And we could go a long way in just like sort of listening to that intuition. So I do think lifestyle changes for sure should be a warning sign, particularly if somebody's taken a sharp left and they're doing stuff they've never done before. But I also think just counting people out just for the sake of thinking, well, they've never struggled before, is probably not very wise either. So it's better to just sort of act conservatively,
Thank you, Liz. And thank you to the whole panelists and all the presenters. It was this was absolutely fantastic presentation. I love seeing how all the states and across the country were represented here tonight, and it's all thanks to TMC. So Talisa, you want to take it from here as she talks to her child?
As soon as it's time for me to talk, you guys, my 3-year-old came over to me, but hey, it's the virtual world. And that's being recorded right now. So wonderful. Thank you so much, Pat, our host for tonight, and all of our speakers, Elizabeth, both Matts, Karen, Herman, Bradley, and Jordan. I want to make sure I didn't miss anyone. You all did such a wonderful job. For those of you all that know me personally, or at least know me through TMC, ending on a little bit of what Elizabeth said, there is no look to what someone in their darkest place looks like. You're looking at someone that has survived 2 attempts, which is why trainings like this is so important to me. Being connected to other veterans, getting professional help, working with organizations like the Mission Continues provides me an opportunity to continue to serve, to have purpose, and to also have the tools to potentially save someone else's life, even without my uniform on. So please use the resources that have been provided to you. We will send a follow-up email with everything that has been mentioned tonight. So if you missed it in the chat or in one of the workshops or panelist questions, we will get that over to you. And you will be able to review this recording on our Charlie Mike channel at a later date. So thank you all again. And Charlie Mike. Good night.